Chapter 4 of Finding a Way Out, an autobiography by Robert R. Moton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Doing and Learning. That night I took the same steamer on which I had arrived, and landed at Old Point in the following morning, the 13th of October, 1885. I took a hack, which carried me and my little trunk past Fortress Monroe and up through the little town of Phoebus, then Mill Creek, and on to the grounds of the Hampton Institute. It was to me the most beautiful place I had ever seen. We drove up through the school farm, past the old Butler School. This was a school that had been built under the direction of General Butler during the Civil War for the children of the freedmen, out of the lumber that had been used, much of it, in hospital barracks. We passed on through many acres of vegetables which Hampton had cultivated, and past the National Soldiers' Home Cemetery, where stood some 4,000 or more marble headstones marking the final resting place of men who gave their all to preserve the Union. It is interesting that in that same cemetery, cared for by the Federal Government, there are many hundreds of Confederate soldiers also. Looking upon the well-kept grounds of the Institute, the waterfront, the neat and imposing buildings and farm lands, I felt almost as if I were in another world. A few mischievous boys took occasion to have some fun at my expense. They were already calling out fresh fish, and 2 or 3 of them yanked my small trunk out of the carriage and balanced it on their fingers as waiters balance their trays in hotels. Some suggested that it weighed 10 pounds, others 5. One little fellow by the name of Bates, as I remember, whom I afterward found to be a fine baseball player, wanted to bet it would weigh not over 2 3/4 pounds. I must confess that the small trunk was entirely out of proportion to the size of its 175-pound, 18-year-old, and somewhat awkward owner. But I went through the ordeal good-naturedly, and finally one of the older boys was kind enough to show me to the office, where I presented myself to the commandant, the Reverend George L. Curtis, who later served for many years as a clergyman in Bloomfield, New Jersey. He sent me for examination to Miss Anna G. Baldwin, the head teacher in the night school. She seemed to me very cold and unsympathetic, but I found afterward that I had misjudged her. She was, in fact, kind and very sympathetic, though her manner, like that of many New Englanders, was cold, austere, and very businesslike. The white women with whom I had dealt before had in their manner and speech a certain sympathetic quality that put one rather at ease than otherwise. Anyhow, I failed utterly to pass the entrance examination, though it seemed even at that time to be easy. I think I was bewildered. Everything was new and confusing. Baltimore experiences, my seasickness, so many students, the battalion and band, all were so strange that I found it difficult even to see the print which was given me to read or the figures with which I was working. I was very much upset over my failure. I returned to the office and handed Mr. Curtis the note which announced it. He, too, seemed very much disappointed. He was at the same time sympathetic, and told me frankly that he was very sorry that I had not passed. From what I had told him of the work I had done in school, he had thought I would have no difficulty in passing, but would make a rather high class. He passed the note to Mr. F.C. Briggs, then the business agent of Hampton Institute, who sat at a desk near him. The 2 whispered some words, to which, at the time, I did not think it improper for me to listen. Mr. Briggs remarked, "And by the way, I thought all the time Mr. Briggs was General Armstrong," in an undertone to Mr. Curtis. "It is too bad. I like his face. He has a very honest look," adding, "I think you had better keep him if you can." Mr. Curtis then turned to me with the words, "Well, young man, what are you going to do? You have failed to pass your examination to enter even the lowest class." I told him that I had come to stay at any cost, and that I thought my failure was due to my new surroundings, that I had not been in school for about 2 years, and had read an occasional newspaper and an occasional book when I could get hold of one, but had done no work in arithmetic except of the simplest kind, and had written only an occasional letter, so that I thought I was rusty. He wanted to know if I had any objection to hard work. I assured him I was not afraid of hard work, that I had worked hard all my life. So he said he would give me a choice of work, asking whether I would like to go to the kitchen or to the farm, or whether I would prefer the sawmill. As I had worked at a sawmill and had some knowledge of lumber, I preferred the sawmill and was so assigned. I found this mill much larger and much more complicated than any I had seen before. I was put under the charge of a student, Edward R. Jackson, whom the boys called Big Jack. He was to instruct me in Hampton's methods of grading and piling lumber. I was also admitted on trial to the lowest class in the night school. On the second afternoon of my sawmill work, while piling lumber with Big Jack, the Reverend H. B. Frissell, the school chaplain and vice principal, came up and engaged us, or rather me, in conversation. He knew Jackson, for Jackson was then in what was known as the pastor's class, the school for Bible study at Hampton, where he was then fitting himself for the ministry. He afterward became a minister and had a large church in Alexandria, Virginia, where, for many years, he did very effective work as a teacher and preacher. Mr. Frissell asked me many questions. If I was happy at Hampton, whether I liked the place and people. He inquired about my home and family. His kindly expressed wish that I should have a successful career at Hampton, and his assurance that I was in the middle of friends, made a deep impression on me, and strengthened very much my determination to remain at Hampton and to succeed. For that afternoon I had experienced a certain kind of longing for home that affected me more than at any time during my entire stay at the Institute. Later I was transferred from piling lumber to a raft of logs in the creek to get off the chains. I was shown how to perform this operation by another Virginia boy by the name of John H. Palmer. He went about his work very quietly and always most faithfully and steadily, and as he showed me how to remove the chains, I was impressed by his kindness and patience. It is more than interesting that this same J. H. Palmer is now registrar at Tuskegee Institute, where for many years he has been just as kind and faithful as an officer as on that day 34 years ago, when he showed me how to take the chains off of logs that were brought from North Carolina through the Dismal Swamp, across Hampton Roads, to the school sawmill. I remember so well my first Sunday night at Hampton, 600 or more students, Negroes and Indians, with 100 or more white people, assembled for evening prayers. A modest, unassuming gentleman, with a soothing voice, conducted the services. I do not remember the passage he read, but there were 2 or 3 petitions in his prayer that stirred my youthful emotions, and brought over me a feeling hard then and hard now to describe. A few days before, amid unattractive, meager cabin surroundings, I had bidden good-bye to an earnest, hard-working, devoted Christian mother. In this simple yet inspiring prayer, Mr. Frissell, who had so kindly spoken to me a few days before, asked God's blessing upon the humble mothers and fathers in all of the homes represented by the young people before him, the poorest as well as the best, and he prayed that, amid the pleasant surroundings of Hampton Institute, the young people would always remember their parents who did not live, all of them, in such an environment as we had at Hampton. It seemed most strange to me, amid new surroundings and so many new faces, that everybody should turn aside from work and study, and that this gentleman, a stranger to me, should be thinking, as I supposed, about my old mother, and that he should put in such beautiful words the very thoughts and feelings which were in my own mind. From that night I made up my mind that Hampton was a very good place for me to be, and from that night also I knew Mr. Frissell was our friend, that he was interested in all that concerned us, that he was a man in whom I could confide. The students sang plantation songs, the religious folk songs of the Negro. I had been brought up on this kind of music, and was very familiar with many of the songs that were sung, but somehow there was something about this singing, led by a tall, very handsome black man with a deep and melodious baritone voice, with the 4 parts blending almost as if there were just one great voice singing, that almost carried me into a new world. I had never heard such singing, but somehow, notwithstanding my thorough enjoyment of the music, the dress, and the manner of the pupils, and my real appreciation of being in such a wonderful institution, I was disappointed to hear these songs sung by educated people and in an educational institution. I had expected to hear regular church music, such as would be sung by white people mostly, and such as was written, as I supposed, by white people also. I had come to school to learn to do things differently, to sing, to speak, and to use the language, and of course the music, not of colored people, but of white people. One of my newly made friends, Thomas B. Patterson, who sat next me in chapel and with whom I worked at the sawmill, and who to this day is noted for his frankness of expression, whispered to me, saying, "What do you think of that music?" My reply was, "The singing is all right, but this is no place for it." As the group of us walked on toward our quarters, I did not hesitate to express my opinion regarding this music, and most of the new boys agreed emphatically with my attitude. One or two of the older students argued that the songs were beautiful and people enjoyed them, so why should we not sing them? The only reply I could give was that they were Negro songs, and that we had come to Hampton to learn something better, and then too I objected to exhibiting the religious and emotional side of our people to white folks, for I suppose the latter listened to these songs simply for entertainment and perhaps amusement. I had frequently seen white people at Negro gatherings in my own community, and had the feeling that many of them came merely to be entertained. I remember how strongly I felt many years before then when I attended Robinson's circus in our little village of Farmville. I remember the animals of which I had only seen pictures before, and also the ring performances, fancy riding, antics of the clowns, and so forth. At the close of the main performance, a concert was announced, and my last 10 cents was paid for it. Some 20 or 30 men with faces blackened appeared in a semicircle with banjos, tambourines, and the like. The stories they told and the performances they gave were indeed most interesting to me, but I remember how shocked I was when they sang, "Wear dem golden slippers to walk dem golden streets," 2 men dancing to the tune exactly as it was sung by the people in the Negro churches of my community. This song was as sacred to me as "Nearer, My God, to Thee," or "Old Hundred." I felt that these white men were making fun, not only of our color and of our songs, but also of our religion. It took 3 years of training at Hampton Institute to bring me to the point of being willing to sing Negro songs in the presence of white people. White minstrels with black faces have done more than any other single agency to lower the tone of Negro music and cause the Negro to despise his own songs. Indeed, the feeling of the average Negro today is that the average white man expects him to jump Jim Crow or do the buffoon act, whether in music or in other things. It is a source of gratification, therefore, to Negroes generally that Fisk University, Hampton Institute, Tuskegee Institute, and many other Negro educational institutions have persistently preserved and used the folk music of their people in keeping with the spirit of its origin, thus not only elevating it in the estimation of colored people, but causing others also to appreciate its value and beauty. A few Sunday evenings later, when General Armstrong had returned to the Institute, he spoke in his own forceful manner to the students about respecting themselves, their race, their history, their traditions, their songs and folk lore in general. He referred then to the Negro songs as a priceless legacy, which he hoped every Negro student would always cherish. I was impressed with him and with his address, but I was not entirely convinced. However, I was led to think along a little different line regarding my race. The truth is, it was the first time I had ever given any serious thought to anything distinctively Negro. This also was the first time in my life that I had begun to think that there was anything that the Negro had that was deserving of particular consideration. This meant a readjustment of values that was not particularly easy for a raw country lad. I think it was in December of 1885, or late in November, that a group of boys, of which I was one, was returning from the Soldiers' Home, which is separated from Hampton Institute only by a creek. We had noticed, before going over, a colored man going through the engine room and boiler room and over the lumber yard, looking at the machinery, lumber, sawmill, planing mill, etc., and we met this same man on our return, going through the orchard, the farm, and the truck garden. We wondered who this man could be, who seemed rather familiar with things at Hampton, and at the same time appeared to be very much interested in all the work of the place. When we went to chapel that night, this gentleman sat next to General Armstrong on the platform in the old Witten Chapel. There were many visitors from the hotels in the town as well as the regular audience, and there were more teachers in chapel than usual. It was the first time I had seen a colored man on the speaker's platform. We were glad and took much pride, as the Negro students generally did, in any honor that came to a colored man at Hampton, that is, any special recognition that came from General Armstrong. After the usual devotional exercises, General Armstrong, in his characteristic way, introduced this gentleman to the audience. He presented him as Booker T. Washington of Tuskegee. I remember now what a beautiful introduction General Armstrong gave him. He spoke of the possibilities of the work at Tuskegee, and felt very sure that Tuskegee would some day be as large as Hampton, if not larger, and he predicted that Booker T. Washington would eventually be recognized as one of America's most distinguished citizens. He made this statement, he said, because he was thoroughly acquainted with the man of whom he was speaking. Booker Washington, he said, had been one of his boys, that he had served as his private secretary, and that he had recommended him for the work in Alabama, that during the past 5 years he had had wonderful success in gaining the goodwill of the white people and the colored people surrounding the Institute, and that the North had responded to his appeals for aid. Indeed, General Armstrong had given no one so strong and, it seemed to us, so flattering an introduction, though many distinguished visitors had already appeared on that platform since I had entered school. There was not much known then of Booker T. Washington, though General Armstrong and others had frequently referred to him and the work which he had started at Tuskegee in Alabama. Even at this time, General Armstrong had pointed him out as a sample of what he hoped the Hampton students would look forward to becoming after completing their education. He hoped they would start schools on the Hampton plan in rural communities. While we were pleased at the introduction, we were anxious that this colored man should measure up with his address to what General Armstrong said in the presence of so many white people, to say nothing of the colored people. It made us all the more anxious that the colored man should appear to good advantage, and I confess, as I think of it now, the appearance of the speaker did not impress us strongly. I remember some boys whispered, "We're gone tonight." There is something pathetic sometimes, I think, about the anxiety on the part of colored people that one of their number shall show up to good advantage. The conditions under which we live, the early predictions that the Negro would not succeed, and the persistent comment that he is an inferior individual, have created in the race an anxiety and an earnest desire that every effort the Negro puts forth shall be of the best. We were especially anxious, therefore, that on that occasion he should hit the bull's eye, as we used to say. He had not spoken many minutes before all of our anxiety had disappeared. He started off by telling a story, which I do not recall at this time, but I know it was something about eating partridges. He spoke of what he was trying to do at Tuskegee Institute, and said modestly that he was trying to carry out, as any graduate should do, the ideas of General Armstrong and Hampton. He spoke clearly of the importance and value of trade education, and pointed out the fact that the men who had learned their trades in slavery were passing, and that white men were taking their places. He emphasized the importance of rural life, buying farms, good homes, and the degradation of one-room cabin life, and while he did not in any way belittle college education, he did emphasize the fundamental need of trade education, the buying of land, the building of homes, bank accounts, etc. These, he declared, were essential to the highest development of any people. As I think of it now, and as I thought of it then, we considered it perhaps the most remarkable address we had ever heard, and coming from a colored man about whom we had felt so much anxiety, it was all the more impressive. We were not expected to applaud in chapel at Sunday evening services, but there was a spontaneous outburst of applause from the audience when he sat down, and it was prolonged. General Armstrong arose, remarking, "I'm glad you had the good sense to break the rule on such an occasion." He added, "This is for me, as well as for you, a very happy hour." It is unnecessary to remark that that address was the talk of the year among the students and teachers. We had some Indian friends who used to come to our rooms after meetings of this sort. I recall now that until tapped, some 8 or 10 of us with our Indian friends discussed that speech. One of the latter, John Archambault, remarked to the group that the only fault he found with Booker Washington was the fact that he was not an Indian. My 12 months' work at the sawmill was hard and difficult, but we got out of it a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction. I, with my associates, learned a great many things, especially about lumber and machinery. I learned, among other things, to fire a huge boiler, something of the quality of coal, and how to get the most out of it. I learned to run the big coreless engine, much about steam fitting, and a good deal about carpentry work, though I had worked for a while as a carpenter before. There were about 22 boys who worked at the sawmill with me during that year. The record of those boys, since leaving Hampton, what they have done, would be interesting reading. Mr. William T. Westwood, our foreman, an ex-Confederate soldier, had very high ideals, and insisted frequently against our private protests that we live up to his standards of work and neatness in piling lumber, as well as in our personal appearance in overalls. Even to this day, though no longer connected with the school, he continues to take a very personal interest in all of the young men who come under his instruction. I closed my year at the sawmill in October 1886, when I entered the regular day school. During the previous year I had worked in the day and attended school at night. This was customary among students who did not have the means to enter the day school directly. I had the choice between entering the highest class in the junior grade or the lowest class in the middle year, for I had been promoted from the lowest class in night school after 3 months and was already a junior in regular standing in the school. Inasmuch as I would be entering the higher class with 2 conditions and the lower class with no conditions, I preferred the highest junior grade to the lowest middle, much to the satisfaction of the head teacher, Miss Mary F. Mackey, to whom Dr. Washington referred in Up from Slavery as the one who gave him that now famous entrance examination. But I knew my weakness, and I knew my deficiencies in English particularly, one of the subjects in which I would have been conditioned, and I knew further that if I missed the junior training I would probably be handicapped for the remainder of my course. It was also true that my knowledge of geography was rather limited. I would have been conditioned in that also, so I made my choice advisedly. Soon after this I was made an officer in the battalion, and was given charge of one of the boys' buildings, being responsible to the commandant for the physical care of the building as well as for the conduct of its occupants. I recalled that my father yielded under protest to my coming to Hampton as a work student, urging me to wait another year while he and I saved sufficient money so that I could go to Petersburg and not be obliged to do work in the school. He felt, and I shared his feeling to some extent, that I knew all there was to know about work, but somehow I discovered during my year as a work student that I was constantly running against new things and new ways of doing old things. In the care of my own room, in the drill, at the sawmill, in the night school, and even in the dining room and on the playground, my vision grew continually wider and larger, and I became more skilled in many ways with many and various things. That work year was a sort of initiation into an entirely new life, new surroundings, new people, different races, new standards, new ideas and ideals. And I have always been glad that in spite of my father's protest I had come, not because I wished to work, but rather because I did not wish to delay another year in getting an education, and had taken this year of work at Hampton Institute. But the first year in day school was different. I assimilated, perhaps unconsciously, many of these new ideals. While I learned many valuable lessons from books during this first year, they were insignificant as compared with the indescribable something which I gathered outside of books, very real at Hampton, and very real to me, too, which I cannot accurately describe in writing, but which was nevertheless very pronounced and very definite. In my next year I came in daily contact with a half-dozen or more lady teachers of the sturdy, austere, exacting, yet very kindly New England type, and while many of the subjects which they taught were not entirely new, the presentation was so different, and they brought in so many practical daily life problems, not put down in books, that I found myself for the first few months in a realm almost as strange and different as my first year. One of the most striking subjects, as I think of it, was natural history, or zoology, which was taught by Miss Ford, who after became the wife of General Armstrong. Our collection of numerous specimens, the investigation and dissecting of various insects and animals, the use of the microscope, were all a constant revelation to me of my dense ignorance concerning the common everyday things with which I had been dealing and about which I had thought I knew so much. Mrs. Armstrong was a wonderfully strong teacher, able to arouse tremendous enthusiasm among her pupils, not only to master what was in the textbook, but also to augment this by their own investigation and research in order to test the accuracy of the textbook. I think also that my work in mathematics under Miss J. E. Davis, a graduate of Vassar College, in geography under Miss Mary E. Coates, in grammar under Miss M. J. Sherman, a graduate of Wellesley College, together with my work under others, made for me a most interesting, inspiring, and helpful year. I recall, too, as I am sure every Hampton student does who came under their instruction and care, the helpfulness of Miss Helen W. Ludlow, and her intimate friend Dr. Martha M. Waldron, the resident physician of the Institute, in many other things besides books and studies. Their loyalty to General Armstrong and their devotion to Hampton through many years of service had much to do with making the life and work of Hampton possible. I was not surprised, at the end of the year, when the announcement was made of my name with many others for promotion to the middle class. I was so much impressed with the life at Hampton, and had enjoyed so much the use of the library, where there were more books than I had ever seen before in one place, to all of which I had free access, as had all students, that I asked if I might remain there for the summer vacation and be given work, the money that had been placed to my credit during my work year having been considerably reduced. I thought that perhaps by remaining I would not only save more money through having less opportunity to spend, but that I would also have the use of the library, and be in the atmosphere of educated people, which was much to my liking. I was accordingly assigned to work for the summer, and was given more responsibility in connection with the battalion, as well as with the young men generally. It proved a very pleasant and very profitable summer. I went home for a vacation of 2 weeks in August, my first trip away from the school since I had entered nearly 2 years before. I was very anxious to see my parents and friends, and of course was equally anxious, I think, to show my uniform with my first lieutenant's shoulder straps. Every one was glad to see me, white as well as colored, and the older white people were especially cordial. One thing I noticed, which I could not at that time explain, was that many of the young white men with whom I had grown up were much less cordial than their parents, and frequently they avoided me, and only greeted me after I had greeted them. I attended the church and the Sunday school, and I think I never had a more cordial welcome anywhere, with more consideration, or one giving me more real pleasure, than that from these people at Macedonia Baptist Church, with which I had been connected in one way or another since its organization. And certainly no mother ever had any more real pride in her son and his appearance than mine at that time. It was hard for me to get out of her sight. She insisted on going with me almost everywhere I went. Returning from Macedonia Church with my mother the first Sunday after my return, we were pleasantly surprised to meet Mr. William L. Vaughan and his wife as they were driving home from the Jamestown Presbyterian Church. Seeing me with my mother, they stopped and greeted us very cordially. I was very glad to see them, and apparently they were equally glad to see me. Before parting, they asked me to come over and spend the day with them, which I did on the following Tuesday, when they sent their carriage and driver to my mother's home to take me over. Mr. Vaughan devoted the entire day to me, taking me over the farm on horseback, looking at the stock, acres of tobacco and corn, and showing me other points of interest about the place. He also asked many questions about Hampton Institute and about my courses of study and progress there, showing a deep interest in all that I was doing, as well as in my future. He expressed much satisfaction in the fact that I had gone to school rather than into politics, and possibly into the legislature, for he knew of the incident in my experience a few years before, to which I have already referred. Of course I was greatly interested in all that he showed me on his splendid farm, but I was more impressed with the attention and courtesy which he accorded me during the day, and I did not fail to notice that he gave me the same consideration in many ways that he and his father had bestowed upon their guests of former years when I worked as a boy upon their plantation. While I very much enjoyed the 2 weeks at home, visiting old scenes and old friends, there was nevertheless an element of sadness in it all. The dwellings, barns, and fences were unkempt. There was an air of disorder and confusion about most things and most people. Also, our church and the choir, as well as the sermon of our pastor, seemed so different and disappointing, and so unsatisfactory, that I was rather relieved to get away from it. Before leaving, I discussed this with my mother, but she felt that things were not so very different, that many things were actually better, that the difference was with me. I had changed. I have no doubt she was correct, as she usually was. I returned to Hampton after an interesting and pleasant, though in some ways disappointing visit. But I was never before so impressed with the needs of my community along almost every line. I was convinced that whatever else I might do, there was nothing more worth while than helping just such people in just that kind of a community. End of chapter 4.